Reading from Srila Prabhupada Bhagavatam. This is chapter 7 of volume 5. Bombay, April 29th. Although in a few days Prabhupada would be leaving for Rome, a problem now faced him and the management of his Indian projects. Ramakrishna Goswami was requesting that Prabhupada allow him to go to America. After 4 years of management in India, he was eager to try a different kind of preaching. His god-brother friend Vishnu Swami had pleased Prabhupada with his bus touring in America and had convinced Ramakrishna that this was the most opportune preaching. Srila Prabhupada had accepted the proposal, although reluctantly. Certainly it will be good for the preaching in America, and it will be good for Ramakrishna. But what about India? Once again, Prabhupada was faced with the fact that the only manager for ISKCON in India was himself. Carefully, he reviewed a recent report of the spending and accounts in Mayapur, concerned that all money be handled very carefully and spent exactly for the purpose it was intended. He had written to Bhatta Swami, "Money for the land must be spent for land purchase. If I send money for constructing of a kitchen, it must be spent for that. Also, if you purchase land, it must be properly utilized. And if you actually produce some grains and vegetables, then where is the necessity for further money for maintenance? For maintenance, you require 100 rupees per head without any risk for purchasing lands and cultivating the same. I understand there are only 20 men there at present, so at most 2,000 rupees is necessary for maintenance. I'm not competent to understand everything concerning what you plan to do, but that is my rough estimate. You have tried to explain by long letter, which I have not gone through yet. In the meantime, go on the above principle. Money spent must be used for that purpose intended. That will keep it very clear." From a previous letter from Srila Prabhupada, Bhavananda and Jagataka had become a little despondent, thinking that they may have displeased their spiritual master. But Prabhupada assured them, "I know you are working hard and sincerely. I have no business to criticize, but as head of the institution or your spiritual master, it is my duty to find out your faults." Even Chaitanya Mahaprabhu presented himself as faulty before his spiritual master. To remain faulty before the spiritual master is a good qualification, so he is subjected to rectification. But if one thinks he is all perfect, then there is no scope for rectification. Don't be sorry when I find fault. That is my primary duty. Chanakya Pandit says one must find fault with disciples and sons. It is good for them. Prabhupada also scrutinized the finances in Vrindavan, where Guru Das was president and Tejas in Delhi was financial supervisor. Reviewing Tejas' latest request, Prabhupada wrote back, "I'm closing the list of checks requested by you by registered post, except I'm not sending one check for 2,000 rupees for daily clothes to be paid to the tailor Prasad of Vrindavan. Daily paraphernalia is supposed to be collected separately by Guru Das and Yamuna, not come out of the construction fund as you have requested. Besides, I have advised Guru Das not to pay any tailor, but to make clothes by our own devotees for the deities." Prabhupada also found a serious inconsistency in accounting, which he pointed out to Tejas for correction. "According to my checkbook, after writing the last check for 17,600, there is a balance of only 18,745, but you are indicated a balance of 100,315. Where is the difference? Send me a complete statement of account." Guru Das and Tejas had assured Prabhupada that the Krishna Balaram Mandir would be ready to open by July 1974. Prabhupada designed the invitation cards himself and asked that they printed and sent to important persons. The founder Acharya and the members of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness request the pleasure of Mr. and Mrs. and such company to visit the installation ceremony of the Krishna Balaram temple from August 8 to 10 and accept prasadam. Guru Das Adhikari, local president, Surabhi Das Adhikari, secretary, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, founder Acharya. With only 3 months left, Prabhupada's plans were to travel from May to July. Given permission for transferring funds from Delhi to Vrindavan, he left. He would return in 3 months for the grand opening. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 1, text number 25 and 26. Agni Drema Jiva. Agni Drema Jiva. Yagyabaho. Mahavira. Hiranyarito. Grita Prishta. Savana. Medatiti. Vitihotra. Kavaya. Iti. Sarva. Evagni. Namana. Agni-tritma jiva. Yagyabahu Mahavira. Hiranyareto Grita Prishta. Agni-tritma jiva. Yagyabahu Mahavira. Hiranyareto Grita Prishta. Savana Medatiti Vitihotra Kavaya Iti Sarva Evagni Namana. Savana Medatiti Vitihotra Kavaya Iti Sarva Evagni Namana.
Agni Jayatva Shiva Yagyabaha Mahavira Hiranyareto Grita
Agni-drita Jiva Yagyabahu Mahavira Hiranyareto Grita Prishta.
Samanamidatiti Vitihotra Kavayati Sarvavitipati Namana.
Savanamedatiti Vitihotra Kavaya Ita Sarva Evagni Namana. Agnidra. Idma Jiva. Yagabahu. Mahavira. Hiranyareta. Grita Prishta. Savana. Medatiti. Vitihotra. Kavaya. And Kavi. Iti. Thus. Sarve. All these. Eva. Certainly. Agni. Of the demigod controlling fire. Nama. Names. Translation. The 10 sons of Maharaj Priyavrata were named Agnidra, Idmajiva, Yagyabahu, Mahavira, Hiranyareta, Grita Prishta, Savana, Medatiti, Vitihotra, and Kavi. These are also names of Agni, the fire god. So this is the next verse myself. Iti Shankhavir Mahavira Savana Iti Traya Asam Udvarita Sasta Atma Vidyayam arva bhava aradya krita varichaya paramahamsya eva shramam abhajan. Translation is purport by His Excellency Raghunath Swami Prabhupada ki jai. Three among these 10, namely Kavi, Mahavira, and Savana, lived in complete celibacy. Thus trained in brahmachari life from the beginning of childhood, they were very conversant with the highest perfection known as the Paramahamsa Ashram. Purport. The word Udva Retasa in this verse is very significant. Udva Reta refers to one who can control sex life and who, instead of wasting semen by discharging it, can use this most important substance accumulated in the body to enrich the brain. One who can completely control sex life is able to work wonderfully with his brain, especially in remembering. Thus, students who simply hear Vedic instructions once from their teacher could remember them verbatim without needing to read books, which therefore did not exist in former times. Another significant word is arba bhavat, which means from very childhood. Another meaning is from being very affectionate to children. In other words, Paramahamsa life is dedicated for the benefit of others. Just as a father sacrifices many things out of affection for his son, great saintly persons sacrifice all kinds of bodily comforts for the benefit of human society. In this connection, there is a verse concerning the six Goswamis. Tyaktva tu nama shishamandalapati shrenim sadatu chavat udva dinaganat shako puranaya kopina kantashito. Because of their compassion for the poor fallen souls, the six Goswamis gave up their exalted positions as ministers and took vows as mendicants. Thus minimizing their bodily wants as far as possible, they each accepted only a loincloth and a begging bowl. Thus they remained in Vrindavan to execute the orders of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu by compiling and publishing various Vaishnava literatures. Om Jnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Ummilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Mano Vishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadavayam Dudati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Pada Kamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajantam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalitam Shri Vishakha Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagapati Govishna Govika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tata Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhano Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priya Vanchakalpa Tarvabhisha Kripa Sindhu Evacha Patitana Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Mukam Karoti Vachanam Pangom Gayate Giri Kripa Tamaham Shri Guru Dinatama. With the mercy of spiritual master, blind man can see the stars, lame man can cross the mountains, and dumb man can speak eloquently. I therefore offer my respect, peace, and thanks unto Lord Spirit and my spiritual master. Om Vishnu Krishna 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 Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Nami Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Prachari Nirshijam Shunavadi Vishati Vishakam. So the translation again. Three among these 10, namely Kali, Mahavira, and Savana, lived in complete celibacy, thus trained in brahmachari life. From the beginning of childhood, they were very conversant with the highest perfection known as the Paramahamsa ashram. So the Vedic idea of the time is circular. It's not linear like in the modern day. The modern day idea is like we are started very primitive and then we kind of evolved, and at some point it was the writing was invented when we became kind of advanced enough. At some point, it was invented the writing. However, here we can see that it was like opposite the case. When people's ability and mental capacity has degraded, then the writing was invented. So as we read it in the Vedic literature, and is referred as well in this verse, that people used to have such a great memory due to this celibacy principle, Urdhva when you celebrate and doesn't lose or discharge semen, then people become very, very bright, very good memory, to the extent that whatever one is reading is able to remember, and to the extent that one can hear once and can remember for the rest of life. There's such a powerful ability for the memory to function that is practically unheard of in a modern day, and it is connected directly with this principle of celibacy. And in the modern day, it's considered that it's bad for you to be celibate. But there are many great thinkers of the world, even in the more modern times, that we are actually celibate, and some of them were like geniuses from material point of view. For example, Einstein is one of them, and there are many others. It's not so much publicized in the modern day, but some of the great geniuses, even in the history of science, we are celibate people. And there are some examples, even in the modern, like the last 100 years, 200 years, that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur also had that potency of remembering things, whatever he read. Described the things that he read. He knew Bhagavad Gita by heart when he was 5 years old, and he also had practically anything he read, he could remember verbatim, as it says in the purport. You could refer to the specific places in a book that he read. He had such a fantastic, bright memory. And of course, this is not so common in this age of Kali, but it was completely, looks like majority of population had that ability because they lived this pure way of life. They had this fantastic memory. And even in our movement, we have, some devotees who has got like fantastic memory. For example, Praladananda Maharaj, he has memorized entire Krishna book verbatim from beginning until end. It was the full Krishna book in and out. And also, there are some other devotees who can practically recite almost dramatically the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya, Ramayana, and other things with very minute detail. Practically you can. It seems like they're seeing the pastime right in front of them, and then recite the pastime with every little detail, and then you can zoom in going through the pastime and then zoom in into the pastime and just explain everything what is going on, and then zoom out and just carry on with the pastime further. So this is like a phenomenal ability to remember. Of course, this could be, for some devotees even beyond the remembrance. Maybe they are, in one sense, they reach that advancement that those pastimes become manifested fully in their consciousness. It's not like so much remembrance, more just like just bringing to the forefront of what they already experience and see. So this very, very powerful thing is the celibacy in modern day, when there is no value for this principle at all. We can see there is a lot of problems that are to do with the memory, because that principle is so much neglected. There are so many things that are like people in old age, and nowadays even in the early stages, sometimes very early, like things like sclerosis, dementia, and like being very forgetful, then when it becomes old and that kind of thing. We can see that that's not the case when you read in the Srimad Bhagavatam about great sages. When they were getting old, like a Bhishma, who was a lifetime brahmachari, celibate. He was like a grandfather in the battlefield, and he was the strongest. He was the strongest person. It was considered there was no match for him in the battlefield. He was so powerful. Well, nowadays, when you get old, you're getting weaker and weaker and weaker, not only physically, but also mentally. So, Dhanavir Goswami in his book, Brain Gain, which he originally wanted to call it Brain Drain, he decided in the end to call it Brain Gain to make it more positive. So he says, like a quote in Ayurveda and other things in his own as well opinion, that a lot of modern day diseases, including dementia, are caused due to neglect of principle of celibacy. People waste their like a brain, and practically you could say waste their brain by overindulgence in the sex life. So it's interesting that that connection seems to be there. Another very prominent disease is what is that when people forget who they are and that kind of thing. Amnesia. There is another one. There's another one that is becoming more and more prominent. Alzheimer's, yeah. Alzheimer's is another one. And this kind of even quite a new diseases actually. It wasn't so. Well, there was some other problems in previous ages, but this seems to be quite a modern diseases to do with the memory, forgetfulness, forgetting who you are, even to the extent that you forget who you are, you don't recognize your relatives, etc. So these memory-connected things, there is a correlation with actually lack of celibacy, or completely opposite. People overindulging completely in a sex life, and that affects people's ability to remember, and it seems to be getting in earlier and earlier stages of life. So it was very significant principle, celibacy, for being able to study Vedic literature and Shastras. And this memory is also connected with intelligence, because in order to apply something, you need to remember. So if you are not able to remember certain aspects in the teachings, etc., then this will be very difficult to apply. So Vedic principle is that repetition is how you call it, mother of remembrance. So the more you hear something, it goes deeper, you remember, and then you're able to apply. And then chapter 2, text number 62 and 63 of Bhagavad Gita, this principle is also there, that while contemplating the objects of the senses, a person develops attachment for them, and from such attachment lust develops, and from lust anger arises, from anger complete delusion arises, and from delusion bewilderment of memory. When memory is bewildered, intelligence is lost. So that connection is there. When memory is bewildered, intelligence is lost. There is communicating power. So that's the situation as well in a modern day. The intelligence, the ability to discriminate between matter and spirit is completely lost due to this overindulgence in sex life. One comes completely on a bodily platform by that overindulgence, that whatever sensation the body gives, it becomes all in all, and there is nothing more than this. And because there is no other experience that people have in their life apart from physical and mental thrills, they become completely mad after that experience, and it becomes very, very attached, and memory suffers, and then intelligence suffers, and there's many different types of even mental diseases. Like in the modern day, we can see there is so many, apart of the ones that we mentioned, that to do with the memory, there is also lots of mental health challenges, and that, some of them will be also connected with the neglect, of celibacy principle, because when that is strong, one is very mentally sound, one develops a strong mental powers, intelligence, etc., and becomes more acute and more strong, and more, one is able to control one's senses much more stronger, and just take a certain direction in life. As we can see, some of even those celebrated scientists, that ability to focus on one thing and be like an AKH, fixed in a certain things, in certain goals, um, is very strong, and they were able to pursue and achieve a certain results and goals. And in the modern day, people are really struggle to remain focused. There are so many distractions. The attention span is very low, and etc. So you can see actually that many problems has came up due to this neglect of celibacy. Principle is even considered now dangerous celibacy. And because people don't know anything else, and they don't replace that drive, that energy that is there, which is ultimately, it's our love for Krishna, that perverts, when it becomes perverted, it becomes some sort of sexual drive. But it is our original love for Krishna that we want to please the object of our love, which is Krishna, the ultimate object of our desire to love and to please is Krishna. So then that principle is forgotten and covered in a material existence. And then the main focus becomes gratification of our body, and try to squeeze as much pleasure as possible from that. So therefore, when one doesn't know anything else, and that becomes object of one's ultimate gratification. So when one is restrained from it, then there will be obviously some misery, and that misery is considered now that, if you don't do it, if you are restrained from your attachment, then that cause you some unhappiness, and therefore, even modern psychologists, they encourage you, to indulge as much as possible, and practically from the early age as possible, and it's considered unhealthy. But if that principle is applied and there is a higher taste, param drishtva nivartate, and experience higher taste. So there is the senses, the sensual drive to enjoy sense objects remains, but by experiencing higher taste, then one is fixed in consciousness. So because there is no experience of higher taste, and that's why, even some scientists will say that it's bad for you. However, people now who are starting to do more meditation, they start to experience, at least to some extent, some sort of peacefulness of mind and that kind of thing. That's a little bit of experience of higher taste. There's more to life than just the sensual drive, to enjoy more and more and more. And I heard there is now even a movement of people who actually decide to restrain their senses, and restrain from sexual drive, and they're actually bounce from each other the benefits that they experience, which actually challenges even like a modern scientific views. How they become more strong, and even in the sports, even in the sports field, there is like a common knowledge that before like a match or like important fight, boxing or something like that, the coaches, they recommend celibacy for a better, physical performance and focus and strength, better physical strength. So you can see it's exemplified in Bhishma. Bhishma Devi was very, very powerful, despite of being the oldest person practically on the battlefield. And also there's a physical benefits, there's a mental benefits, but also there is the foundational for the spiritual benefits, because one's memory becomes very acute. So if by studying Vedic literature, one is able to remember better, and with the ability to remember, the ability to apply increases. Because if you can't remember what you hear, what you study, then it will be very, very difficult to apply. So this is our fundamental principle. The spiritual life starts from hearing, and if it goes through one ear and comes out through other ear, it doesn't say anything. It will be difficult to practice. Practice will be quite poor if you're not able to remember. So therefore, this continuous hearing is important, but this foundational principle of celibacy is very important, so we'll be able to remember, and therefore we'll be able to practice much better and apply much better. And of course, in Kali Yuga, everything we need to write down, but memory is poor, so you have to write things down so that you're able to remember, but you may forget to look at what's written down or very written down. So therefore, this celibacy is very important to cultivate, and in due course of time, one will feel a great benefit from the celibacy. You will feel increase of capacity to remember, increase of capacity, intellectual capacity, and it's a very, very practical thing. One can perform that experiment and will feel the benefit in due course of time. Of course, it may take a little bit of time to recover, because that's the Kali Yuga, this principle from childhood. People used to get educated from childhood, this principle, but now it's like completely opposite. So to recover, it may take time, to restore your brain capacity after wasting it. Yeah, it will take a little while. but it's a fact that it does work, there's no doubt. One can practically prove that for themselves. So this principle enhances very significantly our Krishna consciousness. Is one of the pillars, as well as connected with the cleanliness aspect. When it's not possible to have a cleanliness physically and mentally when one indulges in sex life. The only thing when it is in a Vedic literature allowed is for procreation of children. So, and generally in other yogic systems, that is not bhakti yoga, like a jnana yoga, etc., like various types of mayavadis and gyanis and yogas, is completely forbidden sex life. Nowadays, various yogas, they like overindulge in it and do yoga just when he has the sexual capacity. This is completely bogus. Idea is nothing to do at all with yoga and jnana yoga, like various mayavadis, as well as you get like various types of teachers from India. They say, this indulge this to the max and you get realization. This is again is completely against yogic principles. Only, in fact, practically in bhakti yoga, the sex life is allowed for procreation of children because it's such a powerful principle that when this is done for procreation of children, it doesn't diminish your spiritual power because it is done as a service to God, while in other yogic systems it is considered completely against the principle of advancement. Like in jnana yoga, they have completely renounced the world and we absolutely celebrate before getting anywhere, in that spiritual discipline. While nowadays, they promote this yoga, that yoga, jnana yoga, ashtanga yoga, and there is this indulgence in sex life. It's no chance to advance, if that principle is not applied. It's practically impossible to advance. So that's about sex life, and there is also in celibacy, there's another principle that was brought up by Prabhupada from very childhood, and also being affectionate to children. So Prabhupada interprets this about how Paramahamsas are very affectionate towards sharing, affectionate to those who are suffering in material existence, that they are sacrificed their bodily comforts for the benefit of humanity to live a very simple way of life. Because with the bodily comforts, what comes is that you have to spend a lot of energy to maintain various types of bodily comforts. If we can simplify our life, we gain much more time for benefiting other people. So the sages and saints, they completely minimize those necessities and needs so they can maximize their work for the benefit of others, and study their scripture, practicing, and then sharing those realizations that they gain. But the more bodily comforts are there, the more you have to work hard to satisfy those bodily comforts, and the less time and energy remains for what to speak about spiritual practices, and what to speak about sharing with others. So whether one is living in a temple or if one is living working, there will be a different, of course, it's a dynamic principle of reducing one's comforts. Living in a temple as a monk, one can minimize in one way, but living in a family, you have to provide something for your wife and children is necessary. So that principle will be applied in a different way, with a different capacity. But the principle of simple life, it has to be there. It's just how it applies. It will be different in a different circumstances, whether you are like a monk, or whether you are not a family, or whether you are vanaprastha. that principle will apply in a different way. But by applying this principle, one gets more time for spiritual practices, and one gets more time for sharing the message. Because if you have this big car and big house, then you have to work very hard to pay the bills, and you have to work very hard to pay the mortgage, etc., etc. And then spiritual life becomes difficult. But to speak about showing compassion to others, of course, one can show that compassion by one's example. Um, but that example has to be clear, that by having a more simple way of life, one is actually much, much happier than having, lots and lots and lots of things. Of course, some people has got that karma. They get like a massive things that come into their life due to their, they work hard in their past life. So these things also can be used in Krishna service and be used to support to propagate this Krishna consciousness movement. So it's not this clarification necessary that one may have a lot, but that can be used in Krishna service. And some people has got this drive, to make a lot of Lakshmi. And so they can use that in Krishna service. If that is propensity, they can support Krishna consciousness movement and support education. They may not do it themselves directly, but they can give a donation to spread Krishna consciousness. But as you can see, Goswamis, they give up the exalted posts as ministers to become mendicants, to show much higher degree of happiness that comes by being Krishna conscious and by sharing Krishna consciousness. It doesn't depend at all, that happiness, real happiness doesn't depend at all how much you have in your life in terms of material possessions. So are there any questions or comments on these points? This one interesting thing to mention is about sharing the benefits of a celibate life, whether we should do that to people when you meet them for the first time, or the first lecture that we give at the newcomers. So it is an interesting point that even the most conservative person in our movement, or one of the most conservative, maybe not the most, but one of the most, like Bhakti Vikasha's family has written this book, Brahmacharya and Krishna Consciousness. So he's got a chapter where he explains about sharing, teaching celibacy to newcomers. So he actually is discouraging that, because unless people experience higher taste, it will be, and this is the only thing, it's like their main thing that they become extremely attached to, and the gratification they get is from the sex life. So when we start our Krishna conscious education, we don't start from the celibacy point. When we educate people in Krishna consciousness, and it is a very significant principle of Rupa Goswami that Srila Prabhupada also mentions in his teachings often, is that Rupa Goswami's principle says that rules and regulations follow later. Our first point is to help people to become attracted to Krishna. And in the most early stages, it is that attraction, the faith is very, very weak, and people don't even have a concept of God. They are faith awakened by chanting the holy name. Their attraction to Krishna starts from attraction to the holy name. They like chanting, they like dancing, of course, prasada, and from that higher taste, that attraction to Krishna in a form of holy name, attraction to Krishna in a form of prasadam, when that becomes prominent, the Srupa Goswami's principle, that attraction to Krishna increases, then the rules and regulations can be introduced at that point, and people will be receptive at that point when they experience this higher taste and they know it's real. Then those rules and regulations, including the celibacy and practicing celibacy in daily life, then can be introduced and educated, and it kind of becomes real for the people that they can actually practice it, realistically. So, Srila Prabhupada ki, Granth Raj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Nitai Gaura Premanande, Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki Jai. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare